We had no idea what would happen. Truthfully, Dan and I were texting. This is how the idea was hatched back in 2011. I was in LA at the time, and Dan was in New Orleans, where he still is. And we were just texting back and forth as sports fans do, basketball obsessed sports fans do. And we just contemplated this idea of a $50 million prize basketball tournament that would be open to all, whether it's LeBron, Duke, people from the YMCA, you and your friends. And it became this obsession and this talking point between Dan and I, where we went back and forth with this concept. And Dan was a big fan of soccer at the time. And he brought up the FA Cup and this tournament style, this open tournament style. And we wondered why. I mean, we're huge fans of like promotion, relegation, alternative formats like that. And we would love to see all of that in basketball. And unfortunately, it's such a closed system here in America.
Thank you very much for joining us, Dan and John. It's a pleasure to have you both on Hoopsology. Before we delve into TBT, John, I believe I asked you this question when you first came on the show. So, Dan, I'll ask you this question. It's a bit of a tradition on our show because we delve into basketball culture. So, take this question any way you want it. What is your first or favorite basketball memory?
I think the first one was the 1984 NBA Finals, Celtics Lakers, and my dad had set up a basketball hoop on a telephone pole in front of my house. And I was 8 years old at the time, and I distinctly remember going outside during those finals, and at least the 84 finals, yeah, and probably 85 and 86, and shooting baskets while the game was going on, listening to this radio, like this transistor radio that was leather bound that my parents had from probably the 1960s. And watching, and I'm sorry, trying to pretend that I was like the guys in the Celtics, like Larry Bird and Danny Ainge and Dennis Johnson and Robert Parrish, and trying to shoot like each of them. They all had these really distinct 80s shooting motions. And I remember doing that multiple years in a row because the Celtics were good, obviously, in that time, and they made the finals 3 years in a row. And those are very formative years for me. So I'd say that's probably my first and favorite basketball memory. Aside from when TBT started, obviously, those are now my favorites.
That's awesome. Yeah, my dad's from Boston, so he's always given me grief about the Celtics, mostly hammering their decisions. But
Yeah.
rich.
Well, lately, yeah,
Yeah,
especially this off season, they've been
yeah,
a little tough, but the '80s were just a great era for
yeah,
basketball
totally
generally.
agreed. So let's delve into the TBT, and I think I'll just tell you a little background of how I found out about the tournament. My other co-host, he was my boss at the time when this tournament was created. So when he was a huge basketball fan. So when I first heard about it, it kind of creeped into my mind of him and I trying to create a team, but we were just too slow. And then I was telling Dan off air that I live in Denver, Colorado, but I'm originally from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and an alumni of the Lobos, the University of Mexico basketball team, in terms of just watching them. Didn't play for them, but just as a fan. And so it popped into my mind of kind of, wanting to do this, but somebody beat us to it. And now they have a team that's been in the tournament for a few years now, the Enchantment. So I think this has always been something that we've been watching. But I want to get both your guys' just kind of through line of when this tournament started to now, and just the success that this tournament has and just its place in basketball culture. It is a staple of not only just the basketball calendar, but the sports calendar. For both of you, is this what you guys projected? Is this kind of unbelievable, or did you guys were fairly confident that this was going to happen?
We had no idea what would happen. Truthfully, Dan and I were texting. This is how the idea was hatched back in 2011. I was in LA at the time, and Dan was in New Orleans, where he still is. And we were just texting back and forth as sports fans do, and basketball obsessed sports fans do. And we just contemplated this idea of a $50 million prize basketball tournament that would be open to all, whether it's LeBron, Duke, people from the YMCA, you and your friends. And it became this obsession and this talking point between Dan and I, where we went back and forth with this concept. And Dan was a big fan of soccer at the time. He brought up the FA Cup and this tournament style, this open tournament style. And we wondered why. I mean, we're huge fans of like promotion, relegation, alternative formats like that. And we would love to see all of that in basketball. And unfortunately, it's such a closed system here in America. So we were just going back and forth, like, what if we just put enough money on the table to just blast through
Yeah.
all of these these sort of regulations that exist out there and see what would happen. And it was an experiment we were talking through, and it just became this thing that became more and more serious over time, and something we have ultimately pushed through.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't like a business idea, Justin. Yeah, it wasn't something that we started texting or emailing about, like, hey, what can we do that's going to, revolutionize sports, or what can we, like, it wasn't anything like that. It just was like a modern equivalent of a barroom conversation where two guys are talking about ideas. I think also like in the mid to late 2000s into 2010, like pretty much every team that either of us wanted to see win had won something. The Red Sox won the World Series. The Celtics had won another championship after that huge drought all throughout the 90s. The Bruins had won. The Patriots were doing great. I moved to back to New Orleans, and the Saints won the Super Bowl. It was like one thing after another. It's like, gosh, there's got to be something else that's fun. And we were like, kind of shooting it, and one thing led to another, and here we are.
It is a bit anarchist too. I mean, we just sort of want to mess the system.
Now, that's awesome. You definitely disrupted, that's for sure. We've seen what's happened since. With the tournament, for our audience that's getting caught on to TBT, can you kind of give a synopsis of what the tournament is, and then how has it evolved over time since its original concept?
Dan?
Yeah, I think the easiest way to describe it is March Madness for professionals that happens in the summer. It's $1 million prize. It's winner takes all, 64 teams, single elimination. And ultimately one team walks away with $1 million and one team walks away with nothing. And so the drama that happens in each and every game that we play is, I think, unparalleled right now, certainly in basketball and maybe across sports, because it's unbelievable to see in person.
I think even more broadly, it's about the underdog too, because Dan and I grew up in the 80s, and there was a very I don't know, there's an era of propaganda in many ways. So the films that we grew up with, like Hoosiers, The Natural, Karate Kid, it was all Rocky. It was all about this idea of somebody coming from nowhere and winning a championship. And that was ingrained in our childhood, and I think something that's very much at the root of TBT.
Absolutely.
Now, that's incredible. Have you been surprised by the teams that have participated in this tournament, and then just the grassroots of getting it created? Again, I saw this firsthand with the Enchantment, and I would follow their updates, just them in terms of trying to find a coach, trying to find players who want to play. They have families now, they got other careers, and they're trying to get this together. And then Albuquerque is such a small town, and basically the Mexico Lobos, that's their sports team. They don't have a professional team, but the Lobos have so much history within Albuquerque. You see everybody galvanized, and it's almost bringing back memories of like the 90s and the 80s. It's almost like a celebration of history, never mind their success in the tournament. It's almost just like if they lose, it's okay, because we're seeing all these players get to play again. It's kind of reliving your childhood. So what has that been like? Some other aspects besides not only participating in the tournament, but all of a sudden, all these legendary college players that fans thought they would never see play again, they're seeing them play during the summer. It's quite incredible turn of events for fans who are fans of nostalgia.
We liken it to Field of Dreams, if you're familiar with that film.
Yes.
Where these older legends, former legends, not even older, because these players oftentimes they go overseas and become better than they were in college. So when Aaron Kraft comes back and plays, or Jared Sullinger comes back and plays for the Ohio State alumni team, they're actually better versions of what people remember. But this idea of them being able to play with other players from that same program, or even the same city, who didn't even go to the school, is this very much a Field of Dreams experience for all of our fans to see all these different eras come back together. I remember that first year, Dan, maybe the second year, Lawrence Moten played on the Syracuse team, and he was like in his mid 40s, and he was playing with like Eric Diebendorf and Hakeem Warwick, and then all these different, maybe the Syracuse alumni spanned maybe 15 years, and that was just such an awesome experience for fans.
Yeah. I think the other thing that happens too is that there's all these guys that you don't even realize are playing professionally overseas. The best example I think ever is Eric McCollum, CJ's older brother. Went to Goshen, which I don't think anybody's ever heard of. It's an NAIA school. I think he's 4 years older than CJ, maybe 5. And Eric has had one of the most decorated overseas careers of any American in the last 20 years. He just won EuroLeague, I think with Galatasaray. And he won TBT 4 straight years, which is an unbelievable streak. Like Overseas Elite was one of the greatest dynasties, and I think in modern sports history that nobody even knows about. But to win any single elimination event against professionals 4 years in a row is just shocking to me. So not only are you getting the better versions of Aaron Kraft or Russ Smith or any of these guys that you remember from college. But you're also discovering these guys that you never have heard of before that have somehow carved out a career for themselves overseas, and they get to come back every summer and play on Fox and in front of a national audience. And you're seeing just incredible levels of basketball that, I don't think really would have a platform but for TBT.
Can you both go over the evolution of the Elam ending and then with the NBA adopting it and its other features of the tournament's rule set that you've seen be adopted by the rest of basketball culture? Has that been surprising to you? And do you have other innovations that you plan on putting into the tournament in the future?
Yeah, we're always thinking about different things we can do, and a lot of the ideas are horrible, and Dan shuts them down immediately, or vice versa. But we're constantly challenging ourselves to think of different ideas. The Elam Ending came to us via info@thetournament.com, which is our email address. It was maybe August 8th in 2016. We got a 67-page PowerPoint deck emailed to us from Nick Elam, and it was all about how the end of basketball games are flawed, playing down till the game clock runs out, because it promotes this idea of marching to the free throw line, deliberate fouling to prevent the game from running out. It's the only strategy coaches have to employ. And so he underwent this long time, I think it was maybe 4-year period of TiVoing games at the time, recording games and going and fast forwarding to the fourth quarter and taking all this data over 2,000 basketball games. He found that in 2,000 games, only 11 times did the trailing team come back and win. So he came up with this alternative idea, which is setting a target score at the end of the basketball game and seeing the teams play at the target score, and the first team the target score wins. And we went down the road with Nick. And Dan, you remember the early days with him, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It almost was the amount of research that he had done and the amount of work that he had put into this was almost too much to believe that a human would actually have done. But he had this concept that he wanted to have implemented somewhere. And he emailed, 100, I don't know, 200 people. And to John's credit, John is a zero unopened inbox guy. And he always makes sure that he has every email opened. And thank goodness he opened this email, because it was such a great idea. And when we implemented it for the first time, we had a playing event in 2017 called the Jamboree. And the first game that was played with it, Josh Selby, who was a 5-star recruit at Kansas, NBA draft pick, was playing in this event. And I think at the time, John, he would have been like 9 wins from winning the whole tournament, right? He had a long way to go from this playing event. And he hit a game winner, and it was on the Elam Ending shot. And he jumped in the air. He got surrounded by his teammates. They carried him off the court like he had just won the NBA Finals. And I think all of us looked at each other at that moment and said, this idea is the best. This is the best thing that we've ever seen. And from that point, we decided like this is going into the 2018 tournament across the whole tournament. And then it obviously has become a staple for the event since.
No, that's incredible. And I think it's just a great idea, just something to disrupt the game. And I think with basketball, sometimes it's a little guilty of not evolving and not taking chances. And I think with your tournament and just seeing how the NBA has taken a little bit more chances with the rule set, I think that should continue. Everything evolves over time. And I know people are resistant to change, but I think it's just imperative to push, I think, the art form, not only the sport, but the art form of basketball. Yeah. I think innovation is crucial.
Yeah.
Making sure that the sport remains healthy, in my opinion.
The one thing that's funny is like everybody acts as though sports have been around for 1,000 years and to change anything is heresy. And the reality is that even the longest term sports in America are probably less than 110 to 120 years old. Baseball has been around since essentially 1897. And that's not that long, and you can mess with things. Tastes change over time. And I think if you're adapting to what people want to see, they want more excitement. They want shorter games. They want to see things that are unique, and I think if basketball is to continue to evolve, it's got to adapt in some ways.
Dan, we talk about this all the time, but the business side of sports now is just doing so phenomenally well. There's so many smart people monetizing these properties, and I feel like the sports side of it is doing very poorly. And those two things don't work in unison. And the sports side of it is what purely, when decisions are made, fans in mind, as opposed to decisions being made with monetization in mind. And like that goes to the format being high stakes. I feel like basketball, specifically, the game of basketball played high stakes is so much better than non-high stakes basketball. It's such a different product. And so that was from day one something we know we wanted to do, is this idea of a very high stakes basketball game.
So, what are your expectations for this year of the basketball tournament and beyond? Do you have like the next 5 years mapped out in terms of goals that you want to reach? I'm just very curious in terms of what's kind of the next step in evolution of your guys' own property.
We don't know. We don't have a 5-year plan. We're very happy with the growth that we've hit on for the past 3 or 4 years. Our attendance has skyrocketed, and we've really hit on this idea of nostalgia, alumni teams going into big college markets and presenting the product in front of them. So I think we're just going to want to keep doing what works and keep trying to challenge ourselves to think differently, because we do see ourselves as the people who are responsible for innovating, because we know that there's not an incentive for the big high profile companies and groups that are making all this money to be able to shift course easily and innovate. But I think that's something that we take pride in, is our ability to do that. And I think that's the function that we really serve in the basketball landscape.
No, that's completely true. I want to ask you, do you have any standout moments from the basketball tournament that always stick into your mind? Like, what are kind of like the most seminal moments of the tournament so far?
I'll let Dan go first on
I've
that.
got the two that stand out are just because they're so there's such a dichotomy between the two of them. The first game we ever had was at 8:15 in the morning on June 6th of 2014, and Hakeem Warwick and Marshall Henderson came onto the court. There were maybe 10 people there, and they showed up at 8:12. The game started at 8:15, and there was just nobody there in the gym at what used to be called Philadelphia University. And then the other one was last summer when we played at Freedom Hall, and it was a University of Louisville alumni team versus a Kentucky alumni team at Freedom Hall, and there were close to 14,000 people at Freedom Hall on I think a Monday night in July. And just the difference between the first game and then that game are, for me, as stark as night and day. It just was unbelievable, the difference between the two of them.
Uh, and then the third game was not a TBT game, but an NBA game that Dan and I were at, the All-Star game in 2020 in Chicago. Because Chris Paul, who's a co-owner alongside of us in this property, was instrumental in getting the Elam Ending input into the All-Star game in Chicago, if you remember that game. And it started out as a normal run-of-the-mill All-Star game, very much an exhibition, dunk fest, alley-oops, no defense. And then the fourth quarter comes along. They set a target score. No one knows what's happening. No one knows what's going to happen. But Dan and I are sitting there next to Nick Elam and a couple people from the NBA. And just slowly but surely, like a TBT game broke out. And like Dan and I could see it happening in front of our eyes. And like Kyle Lowry took 3 charges in that quarter. Guys were yelling at each other. The game was having to pause because people were yelling at the referees. There were blocks being made, replay reviews. It was the most unbelievable quarter of basketball that I've ever experienced in my life. And to think that something that we did led to this, it was just that was an amazing moment.
Yeah.
And I remember Chris called us right after the game from the locker room. He was just all excited about the whole thing as well. And he just couldn't believe it. Like nobody could believe that we were able to get that thing into the All-Star game, and it went as well as it did.
Yeah.
What has been some other NBA involvement? Like, has there been any interest just in terms of, besides Chris Paul, since 2020, even before then, other prominent members of the NBA being interested in TBT, taking your ideas and maybe evolving it, or feedback, or even attending games? What has that relationship been like?
There's so many different facets of the NBA. So like on the player side, players have been remarkably supportive. Like they support players in our event, they support the event itself, they love the event. Owners like Mark Cuban's always been a great resource for us and great supporter. Just like casually being able to go back and forth with someone like that, he's been very supportive. Some other owners have been supportive as well. The league office, we don't have much to do with them and don't really communicate much with them. We were involved with them around the Elam Ending and the All-Star game, and we were communicating with them around that whole thing. And we're set with them for that game, and we've been back and forth with them quite a bit since then. But we don't really have much to do with the actual league office itself.
Gotcha. Moving on, another innovation of your guys' brand has been TST, the soccer tournament. And I watch Pat McAfee and I see his involvement. Can you kind of go over the creation of that tournament, Pat McAfee's involvement, and then what's your plan on having that tournament grow as well?
Yeah, we so through LinkedIn, someone reached out, Mike Volk and Henry Timbun reached out maybe 4 years ago, and they played soccer at University of Virginia, and they said, "Have you ever thought about doing this for 7v7 soccer?" And we Dan and I always talk about doing this for every sport imaginable. So we had thought about it, but not specifically for 7v7. And we started developing it with Mike and Henry, and then they brought in a third partner, Aleko Eskandarian, who also played at Virginia. And that has been an awesome experience. And we've modeled TST after a festival more so than like March Madness is very clearly the inspiration of TBT. The inspiration for TST is more Wimbledon or tennis US Open, and this idea of a festival atmosphere, but still have that high stakes open to all aspect to it, the same way we do have with TBT. Pat's involvement has been awesome. Him coming and playing and bringing a highly competitive team. It's a totally different experience. I think even for people who aren't growing up considering themselves as soccer fans, it's a great experience for them.
Oh, that's incredible. You mentioned wanting to do this for every other sport. You don't have to divulge kind of your future plans if you don't want to, but just curious, what other sports do you see can adapt well into this format? I'm just curious.
We've talked about every sport. Dan and I played baseball in college, so we always talk about baseball.
Yeah. I think any sport where you have an overabundance of talented players and a limited opportunity for them to shine, it would work. It really honestly doesn't even matter what the sport would be, but baseball is one that would be awesome, you know. I don't know. I think any sport where you have that discrepancy between the amount of talent available, like basketball is the most amazing numbers. Like there's close to 4,000 Americans that earn a living playing basketball somewhere overseas at any given time.
I think,
And so
that's a challenge ourselves to do things that we wouldn't do things unless we're the first to do it. We don't want to do something that's already being done or someone's already doing very well. Yeah. So we challenge ourselves to find like a unique format. And we've talked about that with several like golf and football and all these different properties. But Dan and I are so annoying. Jack Flaherty, major league pitcher, came to TST just to take in the championship game. And like anytime we're around people like that, we always pester them about like what the baseball equivalent of TBT could look like. And so we're always talking to people and gathering feedback.
What is your opinion of the sports landscape when it comes to how people view sports? So it's the evolving landscape with streaming. A lot of people discuss the state of linear television. What are you keeping your eyes on in terms of how your property is viewed by its fans? Are you looking to innovate in that space as well, or are you trying to look at kind of the trends as the rest of the leagues are going?
Dan, you want to take that one first?
It's really hard to forecast. When we started this, when we were initially kind of going out to the market, the reality TV space was really big, and we kind of thought, oh, there's an opportunity to do something here with a behind the scenes Hard Knock style documentary. Everything has changed so dramatically in the last 12 years, and I think forecasting what the next even 18 months is going to look like is really hard. But I mean, I think it's undeniable that people are watching linear TV and specifically cable in far fewer numbers than they ever did in the last 40 years. So that dynamic has changed exponentially. I think the other thing that's pretty clear is that younger people are watching events in chunks rather than in season-long things. When I was a kid, I watched every Red Sox game the whole summer, 162 games, but no one would ever do that anymore. Even my son, who's a baseball fanatic, would never watch 162 straight games, and people just don't consume that anymore. So I think where we're trying to establish our niche from a viewer perspective is that it's these chunks of time. You don't have to pay attention to TST for more than a week. If you want to follow it for 6 months at a time and the lead up and who's on what team and what player is going from there, like all that's there, but you could tune into TST for a week in 1 hour bites and follow your team and be totally happy with it. Likewise, you could follow the highlights and see all the game-winning goals on Instagram or X or anywhere else, YouTube. So I think what we're trying to do is just fit into that niche as it exists without necessarily trying to establish new ones that hopefully are ahead of a trend, rather just stay where we are and be where people are watching it. I think, John, I don't know if you disagree with that at all, but
Yeah, I also think that gone are the days of anyone finding out about our event because we're on TV or with a certain partner. Like people find us through Pat McAfee being involved in TST or Kun Aguero being involved in TST. They find us TBT through a Louisville alumni team. Like there are just pockets, affinity groups of maybe 200,000 plus groups of fans that we can tap into just by involving certain personalities. So like, we're very much mindful of that.
What is the relationship with the fans with TBT or TST? Do you find if there's a difference between your guys' basketball community and soccer community compared to the traditional communities out there, the relationships between just the fan and just the teams? Like, what are kind of the differences there?
Yeah, I think we're still in the early days. I think we're only 12 years old for basketball, only 3 years old for soccer. So we're still introducing this property to people. And they're coming in through a specific personality or a specific team, and therefore they already have a rooting interest in it, which is exactly what we want. We don't want like a building of neutral people there who are wanting to just be entertained. Like we want people who walk in the door and definitely know who they want to win a certain game, which is what we have in TST and TBT the way it's modeled right now. I think that's a very unique part about our format is that we're pulling fans in with a rooting interest and keeping that in mind all throughout.
No, that makes sense. I think it's a very unique relationship, and I just think I love this format so much. Dan and John, thank you so much for joining me. Do you have any locations where you're at on social media where fans can stay updated with these tournaments? Anything else you want our audience to be aware of as well?
yeah, TPT on Twitter or X is at the tournament. On Instagram, it's at the.tournament. TST is TST7v7 on both Instagram and on X. Those are great platforms to follow us on for tournament-wide updates. John's handles are publicly available, and he's one of the best follows, I think, on the internet, at John Mugar on both. And I hardly ever post anything, so it's not worth following me.
And our website is tbthoops.com. So thanks to Andrew Zolden for registering that for us.
Appreciate the time, guys. Good luck with this year's edition of TBT. We'll be watching. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Justin.